This is the Saturday Morning Serial Podcast with your host, Amanda Ann. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Saturday Morning Serial. I'm Amanda Ann, and today I am so excited to talk about the new Disney Plus series, Monsters at Work, with someone who has worked on it. And this is a show that I can tell a lot of heart and soul went into it, especially as it was made during the pandemic and the shutdown last year when everyone had to work from home. Without further ado, I welcome CalArts alumni and artist Kat Thorson Good to the podcast. All right, so thank you, Kat, for coming on here and being a guest. And Monsters at Work is such a great sequel to the previous Monsters, Inc. film that came out in 2001. Kat is the supervising director for Monsters at Work, now streaming on Disney Plus. She also has directed other works at Walt Disney Television Animation, such as Big Hero 6 series. In the past, she has worked with DreamWorks as an artist on films such as Kung Fu Panda, Everest, and Megamind. So, Kat, can you talk a little about your journey in this industry?
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to get to talk to you and your audience. So I wanted to work in animation ever since I was 16. I think it started when I saw on Disney Channel, they were airing this special about the making of Sleeping Beauty, and they showed like that some of the Nine Old Men were painting a tree. I was like, these artists painting a tree. And I think that's when it dawned on me that animation was a job you could have. And I was like, yes, that's what I want to do. So I was lucky enough to have a high school teacher who, I'm sorry, you're hearing my computer like notify me about meetings.
It's okay.
But I was happy to have a high school teacher who knew about CalArts and that they had an animation program there. So I told my parents in high school, after I begged them for the Illusion of Life for my Christmas present, that I wanted to do animation and go to this art school. And they looked at me and they said, no way are you giving up the scholarships that you've earned. You have to go to real school. So I went to UCSB, where they had an animation class in their film department. And the promise was to my parents, like, I'll take a year of school, and then, like, if I still want to do this, then they were going to support me in going to art school. So that's exactly what happened. I went to CalArts after 2 years at UCSB. During that time at UCSB, I took a bunch of film classes and communication classes and art history. And I'm really glad I did that. It really helped expand like my understanding of things. But because CalArts was really just like focus on the craft. I graduated and I got my first job at Disney Studios. My first film was on Hercules, and I was there for the next 6.5, 7 years. I worked on almost every film that they did during that time period, either in cleanup or in animation. And in Treasure Planet was my last film. So I got to watch 2D animation die, which was sort of like watching your favorite uncle, like, go crazy and disappear. And it was really tragic, and we were all really sad.
Yeah.
But that meant kind of having to retool and figuring out, well, what do I do now? And I took a story class with Tom Cito at the Union, and he, at the end of it, was like, Thorsen, you're hireable. That was my last name back then. And I was like, thank God I do not want to have to learn Maya. So I applied. I had already applied to DreamWorks and for an animation position. And but now I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to be a story person. I want their story test. And I called their recruiter, and she was like, oh, I was just about to call you and offer you a position on Sinbad. I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be a story artist. And she's like, Kat, stop. Like, come in, work on Sinbad. While you're here, you take the story test. We're basically paying you to take it. And I was like, oh, right, foot in the door. That's that thing you're supposed to do. Right. So I went over there. I worked on Sinbad. I worked on the story test at night. I was able to show it to my friends who were in story at DreamWorks and just knock on doors and do all that kind of thing. And submitted my test and just waited. And it was kind of crazy because I was then laid off after Sinbad because 2D was ending at DreamWorks and they were shifting over to 3D as well. And I don't know why, but I just felt like this is gonna happen. Like my test is there. I'm gonna get this job. It was like really nutty. I think my parents were really afraid for me. But I just had this like knowing. I didn't know how I knew. I just knew.
Mm-hmm.
And several months later, like they gave me a call and had me come in, and I was a story trainee on Kung Fu Panda with Jenny Nelson, and it was amazing. I was at DreamWorks for another 10 years, and I didn't expect to be there that long. I think that, I've looked back on that time period and said, like, I never once felt gendered. I never once felt like the girl, oh, isn't it cute that you want to be in animation? Like
Mm-hmm.
I felt sometimes at Disney. I always felt like I was one of the story people. There was always other female story artists in the room. There were female directors and heads of story there, and it was just a really wonderful experience to get to be trained in the craft of storytelling, and what storyboarding is. And I left there to go to work at Disney TV Animation. The guy who shared my office as a trainee way back when we got our first jobs at Disney out of college had a show, and it was called Pen Zero Part Time Hero. And he really wanted to bring like feature storytelling to TV series. Um, I boarded for him on his first season, and then I directed on the second season of Penn. And what I really loved about Penn was we worked hard, like we pushed hard on that, and um, but everybody like really believed in what we were doing, and it was a really tight knit crew, and I got to have a lot of respect for like what series work was, and that pace and that pipeline, um and just how like that's your stuff on the screen. Like it features you could be working on a movie for 4 years and you're like, I had one joke that made it in, right? But in
Yeah.
series, like that's your episode almost shot for shot sometimes up there on screen. So it was very rewarding after 10 years at feature. And it kind of got hooked a little bit on like just the pace and the speed of like, okay, like you work this story, you work this story, you work this story, and you're done, and then
Mm-hmm.
like that's like in 6 weeks, or maybe 8 weeks if you're lucky. And whereas it features, you're like, it's 4 years. It's 4 long years of like, maybe this time, maybe this time, maybe this time, maybe this time. So I really kind of fell in love with the series stuff after Penn. That's when I was on Big Hero 6, the series, for part of its first season. I left that to go into development at Disney TV Animation because I had two projects that I was working on with them. Got to find out a little bit about what development hell can feel like sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there that, the talk of Disney Plus and like making projects for Disney Plus was coming up. One of my projects I was hoping was a, viable candidate for a Disney Plus series. And so when they brought the opportunity of going on to Monsters to me, I jumped. I was like, yes, like, development takes a long time, like, but in the meantime, like maybe I can help build the pipeline here, like by taking this hybrid thing of what REP Bob Scanaway wanted was he really wanted to bring the best of feature storytelling that he'd learned over at Disney Toon Studios working on the Planes franchise. Um, with the Pixar people. Like he wanted to bring that together with working on, a TV pipeline. And he'd had many, many years at Disney TV Animation doing Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and Jake and the Neverland Pirates. And so he was really wanting to cut new ground on this hybrid storytelling model, and I was all in. Like I'm like, yes, let's do that. Let's figure out how to do that. I'm excited to see how to bring feature storytelling to a series for the first time, and episodic. It wasn't an episodic series. Well, actually, in the beginning, Monsters was conceived as an episodic series, and now, as it developed and it grew um, over time, it became serialized, which is what you guys are seeing now on screen.
Awesome. Well,
So
thank you
yeah, like
so
in a nutshell, that's
much
how I ended up on
sharing that.
Monsters.
Yeah, and it's really good to know too that like these companies are really embracing diversity and making everybody feel like they're just doing the same job. They don't treat anybody differently. That's very important today. So
Yeah.
that's really, really refreshing to hear. And
Yeah,
yet,
when I was at Disney TV Animation, like after being 10 years at DreamWorks, when I first started there, there was only 3 women in story
mhm,
across 8 shows. It was kind of nuts. And so I got really involved with women in animation, which I know one of your questions is like, what do you recommend to people who want to get in the business? I'm like, look for groups like women in animation
mhm,
because, the networking that's possible, the mentorship that's possible, because you really had to like reach out and try to grow talent and bring in new talent because they just weren't represented.
yeah,
And what was so incredible was the leadership that was at Disney TV at the time were really responsive to what I was coming in and saying and noticing was amiss. And within like 3 years, maybe a really short amount of time, we were at 50-50 across almost every show
oh
with,
wow, yeah,
female board talent and male board talent, looking at not just like the gender divide, but like the ethnic divide and just diverse points of view and lifestyle, all of it, like all
mhm,
of that came to the table. And I'm really, really, really proud to have been part of that mentorship program that they had there, and of the leadership that was going on at the time to really address, the fact that it had been a boys club for a while and
mhm.
a certain type of boys club for a while.
Yeah, it's just so good seeing too, like female directors. I know, like Frozen 2 had a female director, and just the past Loki series had a female director. So it's really great to see that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really, I think that there's a lot of women who came on my story teams, who I now know are directing, they're supervising producing now at other companies, or
Mhm,
within Disney. It's just really incredible to watch how rapid the growth was and just the opportunities that are now being given, because I think it really pushes storytelling and having those points of view in the room, and you have to make it conscious, like, when it comes to casting and staffing, like I always look at, like, age diversity too, that I want seasoned people, but I want young voices because they're closer to our
mhm.
audience. They probably still have brothers and sisters, or like their childhood is very different than what ours were. And you want that in the story room for conversations because it
Mhm.
just makes story better and more
Right.
truthful and more universal.
Of course. And you mentioned that you got at an early age the Illusion of Life book.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have that too here, and it's such a great book. I highly recommend it for anybody who's interested in animation and just the art behind these films.
Yeah, I think back then it was like the only thing you could find. I saw it at like the bookstore, the local bookstore in my mall in this small town I was living in. And I remember seeing it and just being like, "Oh, what is that? I need that." And then my parents got it for me for Christmas, and
Yeah.
and I was like, I think I carried that thing around in my backpack and like busted its spine and wore it out, and it was heavy. Like, it wasn't like the version that you have today is like much thinner. Like, they did reprints of it, but the original one, which is what I had, it was meaty. It was heavy.
Yeah, you can do like an arm workout with it.
Yeah,
It's actually sitting
exactly.
right behind me as we speak.
Like, I have scoliosis now because of it.
Right. So, so I'm gonna move on to our next question. And so, how different is it going from being a storyboard artist, and you mentioned you were more into the 2D animation, to directing a 10 episode animated series of today? And I know
Right.
you
Like,
did
so
kind of touch upon it.
yeah, so direct the shift from storyboarding to directing in general, whether it's like a 2D show, like if you're a 2D storyboard artist to a 2D show, that's still a big leap, of like
Hmm.
skill sets that you have to, onboard. But I had never worked on a 3D series before. So I mean, I obviously storyboarded at features for 3D films, but I hadn't been through the entire pipeline and process until Monsters. So, one of the first things I had to do was like learn to listen. Like, just learn to listen and ask a lot of questions because they were throwing around jargon that I was like, what does that mean? And like
Mm-hmm.
finding like the person I trusted, which was my art director, um, to go into a room privately and be like, please explain to me what that means. Like, I don't understand what geocache is, you know, like, um, And so, and what that really, I think what directing really meant at the end of the day was learning to delegate and learning to trust that you're going to touch every single aspect, from storyboard to music to lighting to animation to editorial and cutting the reel. And on Monsters, I directed the actors in the booth, which is unheard of in a series. Like most TV series, you have a voice director come in and you sit in the back and like they interact with the actor and you sort of give your notes to them and then they reframe it and talk to the actor for you. Well, that's not how our EP wanted to run it. He wanted to run this series like you would run a feature, and in features the director is directing the talent. And so that's what we were going to do, and it was terrifying. Like, the first few times was terrifying, but later I got used to it, and because of the like generous help of like our engineer Paul McGrath and our EP Bob Scanaway and my editor Dan Molina, like they were so generous with helping me like get my sea legs in that room and feel confident in that room, that it became one of my favorite things to do, obviously, like to see the ad libs and like the things that would come alive later with the actors. So I think that was unique to the Monsters experience on a series. If I go back to like directing on Penn and Big Hero 6, like a lot of directing a series is juggling, like being really good at juggling. You have 3 to 5 episodes going on at a time in various stages. They're either on boards or in animatic or getting ready to ship. You're managing 2 or 3 board teams. You're interacting with the art team. You're doing layout. You're meeting with writers. You're in Monsters. We were recording actors. You're working your animatic with your editor. So on Monsters, we invented this other thing called 3D scouting, which meant that we were laying out every single one of our episodes here in LA with 4 guys who were incredible storytellers just with a 3D camera in our sets. And that allowed us to cut the episodes all over again. So we're actually in real space, which was so amazing because it allowed our boards to sort of focus on character and story. But then we had this secondary level of like seeing the boards translated into 3D space and then choosing camera and talking about camera with them and then cutting that in real time back into the reel. And that's what we sent to our vendor studio. I think that, directing is just being really good at juggling all of those plates. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to be a really good multitasker.
Yeah.
Um, I think that, there was, you have to be good at collaborating and listening to your team and taking moments for your own mental health. I think that there's just really ultimately relying on the people who are around you to be good at their jobs and to
Mm-hmm.
be professional and to create a safe, creative working environment where they can do their best so that you're just shepherding them. And I think at the end of Monsters, I mean, when we were, having to say goodbye after first season because we didn't have a second season greenlight yet. Um, as we're offboarding our talent, I mean, every single one of them, it was just like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. My name's on, up front as supervising director, but like I couldn't do this without every single one of them firing at like on all cylinders and just bringing the best of their own A game and their ideas to the table. So I find that to be really rewarding. And I actually enjoy being on this side rather than knee deep into boards. Actually, it meant there was a point where I'm like, I gave up drawing. Like I'm not drawing as much as I used to, because I'm in 1,000 meetings, and it was also really strange to be the person that everybody turned to, like I'm the decider. There was a day when I was like, why is everyone looking at me? Oh wait, I am the director. I'm the decider. Okay. I must decide now, you know. And I think that, I love, Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In for this because I had to be like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing. Like it feels awkward and weird, but I'm gonna be the decider now. um, and just really owning that part of my journey. And I think also like what directing taught me was like how much of the craft I'd been given by other people, like that I'd been trained in this craft, and not only to appreciate the champions along the way of my career, but also to um, recognize that what I did know, like that I didn't know what I knew, and having to articulate it and give my opinion and talk about how I thought that scene should be animated, or like, snap, or timing, or all these different aspects of the craft. I'm like, oh wait, like that's because like you were working with so and so on this scene from that movie ages ago, and like that's where you learned this, and
Hmm.
now I want it like that, for this show. I think like it's really um just an incredible opportunity to get to do it. And yeah. I think the difference with storyboarding ultimately is storyboarding, you get to put on your headphones, bring visuals to life, and just kind of immerse yourself in a scene and try to bring the written word to visual life. And
Hmm.
that's such a awesome creative process too. But it's sort of like, you're really close to it and you're living and breathing it, and it's performance based and all of that stuff. And it's caring and putting your heart on the sleeve, and it's problem solving and all these other things. Directing is like that, like 1,000 times with a bunch of spinning plates.
Right.
um but I think you do have to like kind of lean into like emotional IQ and leadership and being good at like, leading other people and helping them with their own creative process as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, and I can definitely tell too. There's just so much heart and soul that has been poured into this series, and you can see it on screen. So, but
Oh,
very
thank
well
you.
done.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, the Monsters crew and the team that worked on it, like they just are amazing and incredible, and some of my most favorite people. And I'm just so incredibly proud of them and what, from LA to Icon, right? From the
Hmm.
group at Disney down here in LA to the group up at Icon, like the amount of love that I know all of them poured in, especially because since we did most of production during COVID, like
Hmm.
and we're all in our homes doing this stuff, it's pretty humbling, and really I just couldn't be more proud. So thank you for that.
Sure, of course. And you did mention that you did work with some of the voice actors. Did you work with like the great Billy Crystal and John Goodman?
Yes, so they were definitely, they're all the original voices came back from the movie. So like Billy Crystal and John Goodman, Jennifer Tilly as was there as Celia, Bob Peterson as Rose. They all, I think if they were in the original, they showed up, right? And in the movies, and John and Billy were just amazing. Like got to watch Billy sing for one of my episodes. It was like so cool, and like
That's
just like
awesome.
I'm in the room with the guy who's in Harry Met Sally. How is this your life right now? Like, and then and also just Princess Bride. I'm like, how am I in the room with Miracle Max? What is happening?
Right.
Um, and he's just so kind and generous. And John Goodman, my gosh, like there was a day where we were recording him on my daughter's birthday, and I was a little bit
Oh,
like, I'd like to have taken the day off for my daughter, but we're recording instead. And so like I bet like at the very end of the recording, I was just like, can I mention that it's my daughter's birthday? And he's like, and like would he like say hi to her? And so he did. He like got on the mic and like wished her happy birthday in Sully's voice, and
so
Paul like cut
cool.
it and sent it to me, and I got to play it for her, and it's like one of my favorite
Oh,
little like gem moments of this series is that I have Sully saying like happy birthday to my daughter.
that
And
is
it's just really special
sweet.
because she's autistic. So
Oh, yeah.
like yeah, it was just he's such it was just such a warm, generous, amazing team. It made him, all of them, like
Hmm.
Henry Winkler, oh my gosh, like we love him. He's such a warm, sweet guy, like and he was such a delight and so kind to me. And I mean, here he's in Barry, and I'm like directing him behind the mic, and he's like, "You're doing great." I'm like, I just like I don't even know if I should be telling you what to do. Like,
Right.
you know, yeah, and then, like and even, like, our whole new cast, I mean, Ben Feldman has directed before, and so he was just so committed and, like, he'd wanna rework a line, until he got it right to his own satisfaction many times, and Lucas Neff is hilarious. I think I stepped in the early days when we were in person, I stepped on some of his lines because 'cause I'd be in the room with him, and he would just ad lib, and I'd start laughing so hard that I'd step on it sometimes. I'd be like, "I'm sorry, I have to learn how to laugh without, like, making sound." And, Alana Ubach, oh my goodness, she was the voice of Mama Imelda in Coco, and she's the voice of
Oh,
Cutter, and she is one of the
yes.
funniest, fiercest, like, amazing, strong women, and she's so talented. She's also a lot of other voices on the series. Um, she's just so multi-talented, and Mindy's amazing and generous and funny, and she's so eager to be like come in and play with us, and it was just such a great cast, and how much like they embraced and owned their characters and helped to bring them to life as well was really cool.
Yeah, it seems like too, like voice actors, especially with a big name like Disney and Pixar attached to it too, they have nothing but respect for the studios, and that's really special too for like you guys because they want you guys to succeed.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think, like it was so sad because before COVID, Billy and John were really and we were really looking forward to getting them in the booth together, and like they were so excited to finally have an opportunity to come back and hang out as Mike and Sully because we have this
Mm,
booth where they can both one's in one room, one's in another room, and they can feed off of each other for lines. And we were so looking forward to
so
like that
cool.
happening. But then COVID
Uh,
happened and we're like,
yeah.
okay, I guess it's not a thing anymore. But
Mm.
who knows? Maybe in the future they'll
Yeah.
get to do it. But it's really awesome. I think like we were really lucky that originally, and I know one of your questions was about the guidance from Pixar. We
Hmm.
were originally like not going to have them in the series. And as the show evolved in development, like it just kind of kept Pixar kept saying to us, like, it feels like you want to be at Monsters Inc. And we're like, well,
Hmm.
we're trying to tell this story that's in Monstropolis, sort of like Monsters adjacent. And they're like, well, it really feels like you want to be at Monsters Inc. And we're like, do we? Can we? Is that okay with you? And then, like, I don't know, the hands were shook and agreements were made. And it was like, yes, we're going to tell the story at Monsters Inc. And that meant we had, you know, Mike and Sully around.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, that was really great, and yeah, I can't say what a dream that was to get to be part of this story. It's one of my favorite Pixar movies. I can remember when my niece was born. She was 2 years old when it came out, and she looked like Boo. Like someone
Oh,
like
yes.
literally stopped her and my sister in Target and was like and pointed at her and goes Boo, like
Oh,
another little kid, and so like I was that movie came out when my sister had her first kid and I hadn't had my own yet. And it was just so important to our family in many ways. And then like all these years later to be like, how am I working on this thing?
right. And like people like my age, like I'm in, well, my 30s too. We grew up with these films and Monsters Inc. is a staple. And that leads into my next question here. We are introduced to the characters from the previous films, like you mentioned, Mike Sully. We even see the Abominable show up. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a red carpet for these older characters, but you also introduce these new characters, Ty, Val, Fritz, and the Myth crew, and incorporating a new story with these characters and intertwining like interactions with the older characters. So, can you just touch upon how the Pixar team kind of guided your team at the Disney television animation studio with the storytelling? And just you mentioned that you were going to have like a completely different like Monstropolis, you said, with like Ty
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
Belle.
yeah.
So you
I
guys
can talk
kind
a
of came
little.
together with that.
Yeah. So the property was originally brought um to Disney. I don't remember the original person who pitched the idea. But it was brought to Disney Channel for a preschool series originally, and it was going to be about a construction family of monsters that lived in Monstropolis, and then development is its own beast, and things evolve as stories grow. And Disney Plus was coming online, and they tapped Bob Scanaway to make a take on the show. And what he ended up coming up with was a story of a young guy, who a young monster whose family business was uh, running construction, and that they ended up winning a bid to do some work at the factory at Monsters Inc. And that's sort of how it tied into Monsters Inc. And we're kind of like exploring what it was like to be someone who like secretly longed to work at Monsters Inc., but your dad has this construction company and you're expected to take it over, right? And you're supposed to take over the family business, but that's not where your heart is.
So realistic.
And so we took, so the process would be like we would write, and like we would come up with ideas and episodes and what the series is and who the characters are and how they all fit together, and we'd take it up and do presentations up to Pixar, and they would have Pete Docter and Bob Peterson and Kelsey Mann, people from the original movies, in the room, and just have creative powwows around it. And we'd kick around ideas, and I think that's where, like, very early on they were like, it kind of feels like you want to be on Monsters Inc., and that would make it kind of a workplace comedy, right? And like, and I remember we were having lunch, and Pete started talking about like the people that you don't see. Like Pixar's a giant studio, and like, but the place wouldn't run if it wasn't for their facilities team, right?
Mhm.
And the people that you don't pay attention to, and that it was pretty clear that like we very early on, like Boo was hands off, and Bob's has talked about this in a lot of press and stuff. um Boo was hands off because that's a sacred relationship, with the audience, and Pete, and he felt like, you know that should be allowed for the imagination of the audience to own that, what happened next, right? So with that, our group was saying like, well, okay, like, we're coming up now with the story of this guy who, thinks he wants to be one thing and ends up having to be another. And it felt like, well, as time went on, we needed to be closer and closer to the end of like scare energy and when laugh
Mhm.
energy started. Like, what was the most intriguing time in that timeline would be when things change. Times of change is the most intriguing time. So the biggest moment of change is when they have to shift from scare energy to laugh energy, when you have to move from one way of being to another way of being, and all the things that might change around that. And so we began to weave a new story in that area, and like who would have the hardest time. And a story came up around like when 2D animation died, and that's how I frame it. Sorry, at Disney TV Animation, because that's what it felt like. Um, when the transition moved from 2D to 3D, like, I wanted to be a 2D animator. I didn't want to be a 3D animator. So what was I going to do now? How was I going to reinvent myself? How was I going to keep working? Well, I was fortunate and found a way into continuing to work by being a board artist, because I could still draw and tell stories that way. um there so what happens when you spent your whole life training, going to school for one thing, and then you get to that place and you think you're about to show up and your dream is going to happen, and you find out it's been canceled, it's done,
Mhm.
it doesn't exist anymore? Like, how do you reinvent yourself? Like, how are you going to respond? Are you going to be resilient and find a new way, or are you going to go back home and move in with mom and dad? Like, what are you going to do? And we thought that that was a really good hook, and like really truthful, and something worth exploring, and that sort of unlocked the new direction for the series. Pixar, you know, they really, they came in and they would look at some screenings, and some of their senior leadership would look at screenings, or we would send scripts up to them in the early days. But very quickly, like, it became like, you guys are doing great, like, hands off. Um, out of courtesy, we would send stuff up to them and like get feedback and things like that. But for the most part, once we knew the direction of this series, it was pretty hands off. And the only thing that we were really told was just, you can't have Boo. That was the only directive. um yeah.
No boo.
No Boo, sorry guys, no Boo. um and I think also, like, one of the things that was really cool about finding the new direction for Tyler, and watching him fumble his way through as he discovers his real purpose and dream and what he was really good at, um, was also like what's really important. And we kept seeing these common themes like in the story room where you talk about like how the longer you're at your job and like yes, you grow your craft and you've been doing this and you are at a studio and you're chasing like the shiny object, which is like this particular project. Like there's always a project that's like the project everybody wants to work on.
Hmm.
But sometimes as you grow, you realize like maybe it's not so much about the shiny object, the beautiful, pretty project, but it's about the people.
Of course.
And that
Hmm.
maybe there's this other film at the studio that isn't getting all the shiny buzz or whatever, but the people on it are really amazing and like
Hmm.
they're really cool and they're part of your family. And going back to what you said about seeing the love on screen, like it's something that I learned, growing up in the business, is that you can tell on screen how well people who worked on that particular movie or show liked each other, because I think
Absolutely.
it shows up. I
Hmm.
think that you can tell. When I was on Kung Fu Panda, I was like, that movie was made by a family, and their love for the characters and each other shows up on screen.
Hmm.
You know, there's other shows where I'm like not as successful because like there was, not as a successful, coming together of a team
Hmm.
around that story. And I think like you can feel the love that artists have that they pour into a project, and it translates directly to the audience. So
Hmm.
I
Absolutely.
love it when that happens. It doesn't always happen, but I think it's magic when it does.
Yeah, of course. Um, Going on to my next question here, animation in general has come such a long way with technology, and now streaming services are a hot commodity, especially during this past year. You had mentioned that Monsters at Work was created last year during the pandemic, and your team had been collaborating with the animators at Icon Creative Studios in Vancouver, Canada. What challenges did you all have in the overall creation of this series? And was anything changed story wise because, like, maybe the pandemic had like an influence in it or anything like that?
Yes, I can say from a story standpoint, nothing changed. Like the scripts were the scripts, the animatics were the animatics. Like the story we wanted to tell was a story we're going to tell. I don't believe that there was any technology reasons or things like that the pandemic affected that would have changed the story we have told. Um, how we got it to the screen was a whole other thing. I think that like, in the early days, I mean, like everyone, it was pretty like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get this done? And we just have amazing problem solvers in our IT departments and our production staff who just found ways to get hardware in people's hands and software so that we could do editing online, and a lot of Zoom, discovering the power of Zoom. And
Yeah.
I think that we were really just finding our way through in those early months. I mean, we also didn't think we were going to spend 18 months, doing it this way. We
Mhm.
thought we'd be back in the studio and we weren't going to have to, you know, do lighting reviews on our computers that aren't color correct. And
Mhm.
I mean, I gotta say, from like what was challenging was lighting reviews on a non-color correct monitors and having one person have a color correct monitor and us saying like, does it look right to you? And our art director being like, yeah, I think it's okay. But then I was watching Little Monsters the other day with my kids, and I'm like, is my TV off? Because that light from the door shredder shaft was supposed to be red, and it looks really hot pink, you
Oh,
know. And
yeah.
and uh, and I think we're also like, yeah, we couldn't really see on our little laptops like the texture on that model, and it's like, it's okay, but wow, that's not what I thought I was seeing,
Mhm.
So I think like it's that kind of stuff that the final is not what you think you're gonna see at home.
Right, right.
That were just technical challenges. There's obviously like, you know, uploading files and how long that takes and things that
Oh,
we were
yeah.
definitely like, it wouldn't be like this if we were at the studio. And editing such a collaborative thing where you're sitting in the room with the editor and you're trying things and cutting things in the moment and you're used to being around each other. And I think getting used to doing that and having the same creative vibe when your kids are like in the other room fighting was kind of hard.
Mhm.
My very first this is my very first animation launch to Icon was in my bedroom. I had a live mic. I had to talk for an hour to 40 strangers I never met. And my daughter was having a meltdown because she couldn't be in the room with me. And they could hear
Oh
everything that was
no.
going on behind the scenes. And I'm like, I have a hot mic. I can't mute it. I can't turn it off right now. And I was just sort of like, welcome to what it's like.
Oh no.
She does not understand why she can't have mommy right now.
Right, right.
So I think that, those types of things were really humbling and also just a lot of grace, like, but
Mhm.
at the same time, like we would always say, like, it's so cool we get to see like where you live and like see peek into each other's lives in a way that we might not have shared and shown with each other
Oh yeah. Mhm.
pre-pandemic. I also think that like when I was looking at your question earlier, that like one of the things that really became important on a personal level and on, for my team too, was, and to be mindful of my team, was mental health. Just
Mhm.
really, how are we managing the burnout? How are we managing the anxiety and, or depression or the stress or the loneliness that anybody could be going through at any given moment, and just having a lot of grace around, if a deadline slipped or if someone was struggling to get something turned in on time, or, just technology issues, just
Right, of course.
making sure that you were taking time, for yourself.
Mhm.
And, watching the lines blur between work and home, and, making hard outs for yourself. And, um, when you're in a crunch, that's often hard, even when you're in studio. But I think it was really important from a company standpoint and an individual um, show standpoint, and just as an individual yourself, to
Mhm.
have those check-ins with yourself and be aware of what was going on, and checking in with each other.
This it's just so impressive how this, especially like the show amongst other like movies and television shows, were made at home during the pandemic, and it's just so cool. Very
Yeah, I gotta
inspiring.
say, like, really early on, the animation community at large was like, we are very, very lucky
Mhm.
that the way we make things um, easily transition to this, because most of the studios, all the studios, eventually were able to find these pipelines for themselves and keep people employed. And we knew that that wasn't the case for so many people right now.
Mhm.
And, you know, yeah, we just feel real
Yeah,
lucky.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know you did say earlier, like networking, getting into like a group that you have common interests with. But can you offer any advice for an individual who wishes to pursue a career, whether that's in storyboarding, animation, or directing?
Right. Yeah. So, first I would say, like, don't give up. Like, you gotta be tenacious. I wrote like Tyler, tenacious Tyler, double
Mhm.
T.
Yeah.
I think, like, never giving up. Like, if it's the Rilke quote of, if you must write, you will write. Like, if it's in you, if the spark is in you, you must follow it, and like, and just keep at it and don't give up. I think always be willing to learn the craft. Like, when you start out in this business, it's, a lot to learn. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to grow, but as you grow in this business, that never changes. We're always like chasing like that perfect line to draw,
Hmm.
that perfect line of dialogue to write. I think that, you know, the ability to be curious, to listen, to learn is really what helps people grow and keep employed. Like, there's getting employed, and then there's also staying employed, right?
Hmm.
So leaving your ego at the door, and always being teachable. um that is hand in hand with making sure that, like, you're someone who plays nice in the sandbox. animation is an incredibly collaborative art form, incredibly collaborative, and you just have to know how to have like some, healthy social skills of dealing with other humans and how to take notes. And what the biggest thing about story is, like, you're a problem solver, and your your art isn't seen by the public. That, like, it's not, it's throwaway art. It's just to communicate ideas and to be clear. Eventually it's going to get sent overseas and someone's going to animate it, whether it's 2D or 3D, and no one never sees your drawings. So your drawings are actually just ideas, and to be willing to not, there's something that we always tell each other, the age old like animation lesson of like, be willing to kill your darlings, and not falling in love with the drawing. If you fell in love with the drawing, pin it on your wall, you know, but it might not be the solution, right? It might be a solution for a time being, but a lot of times storyboarding is reboarding. And they often say that too in school and in classes, that so you got to be willing to like try and try again, and that's where the tenacity and grit comes into. I also know, like, for people today, like young people today wanting to get into animation, like, it's never been in a more incredible time. You guys have things that I didn't have, like the internet. I think the internet existed like its infancy when I was in art school. But you guys have like all these artists out there who have their blogs and are posting their storyboards and have online classes and like Animation Mentor and magazines and festivals and all, like animation festivals all over the place. Like, there's so much that you can, across the world, reach out to and immerse yourself in, and reach out to other artists through different forums and feed yourself and grow your talent. And there's so many more schools than just CalArts. I remember years ago going down to Miami-Dade, and they had this huge animation program down there, and they had scholarships for like people who couldn't necessarily even afford college, so that they were helping to push diverse voices, right? And they have a start to finish production studio down there. There's just so many more places where you can learn the craft these days. And then that also goes hand in glove with like technology being abundant. There's Toon Boom and Harmony and things that you can buy off the shelf, and Photoshop subscriptions where you can be learning and growing and making your own films at home and putting that film on YouTube, and who knows what happens, and student Oscars and all that kind of stuff. And that ties into like your story matters. As you said before, like the studios are reaching out, yeah, more so than ever, and recognizing that we need to tell diverse stories. And how many stories are out there that have never been heard?
That's excellent advice, Kat. Thank you so much for that. So, finally, who is your favorite character in Monsters at Work and why?
Oh, this is a hard one. So I'm going to caveat this by saying I love Fritz so much.
I love Fritz.
So the answer is going to be painful to say. I love Fritz so much. I love Duncan, but my favorite character has to be Cutter.
Yeah.
I mean, the like, I was writing down, what is it do I love about her? And I was like, well, maybe this is stuff that I want to know about myself or like lean into for myself, which is like, she doesn't give a crap what people think. She's comfortable in her own skin, knows who she is, and is happy doing what she loves.
Yes.
And I was like, yeah, it's pretty impressive. That's why I love her, because I'm probably working on all of those things personally.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all so relatable, the characters. And Fritz is adorable. Every time he
Oh,
comes on my TV, I go, "Oh, it's Fritz."
I know. I think somewhere out there in the world there will be a plushie, and we always said like we need a Fritz plushie so bad.
Oh
Yeah,
gosh, yeah. I would
yeah,
totally buy that
yeah.
up. That and everyone, Val, Tyler,
Oh, we
adds
need
my
the Val
collection.
neck pillow. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We
Oh
pitched
my
that early
gosh.
on. I want a Val neck pillow. Uh
Oh my gosh. I'll be first in line for that.
huh.
I work at a desk all day, so neck pillows are my thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. I want a Val neck pillow. I definitely want that. I want Tyler Tessman ears at Disneyland.
Yes.
Where you're just gonna like knock people out left and right because they're
Yes.
so long.
That's a good social distancing practice. There you
Right?
go.
Oh my goodness, they should totally do that. It'll keep
Yeah.
people, keep that social distance in line at Disneyland.
Right. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Kat, for coming on.
Oh,
This
you're
was a
welcome. This
great
was really
interview.
wonderful to do. Thank you so
Yeah,
much. I'm
so
so
much
happy to get to
fun.
talk about the journeys and like the lessons learned and yeah. And like I said, like um Monsters, like there's a couple things that I worked on at DreamWorks that I really like. My favorite years there was working with a set of guys on a couple of their holiday specials, and I look back at those years, I'm just like, we just had a good time. It was so creative, and we were just such good people on our team, and we were a family, and it was awesome. And it's taken a long time to have that feeling again, and I think that like Monsters was that from top to bottom, the crew, the cast that we have, the icon team, and how they killed it to make
Hmm.
it look like the movie. Like I just think like for the pipeline that we were on and every obstacle we had in our way with COVID, it's just something I just feel so much joy and pride looking at and watching with my kids.
Yeah, your guys' hard work really shows. So my hat's off to you and your whole team. And yeah, it's so cute.
And I just want to give a shout out to my director, Shane Zalvin, who is my right hand man, and the other supervising team. It was Steve Anderson and Caitlin Ritter, and their some of their episodes are the funniest ones. Like they make me laugh so hard. And
Oh yeah.
I didn't live and breathe their episodes, because there were two teams doing two sets. We worked together in many ways so that they all felt the same, like, and that we were in connection with each other. But man, Bad Hair Day, I was
Mhm.
crying, just crying, laughing. And the scene where at the secret room, love it. That was both of those were their episodes and just so, so funny.
Yeah, we totally understood the Big Wazowski reference too. So that was a
Yeah,
treat.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you, Kat, so much for coming on. Like I said, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, Amanda. Back at
All
you.
right. And with that, I hope you guys thoroughly enjoyed that interview. It was just such a great, insightful, inspiring conversation I did have with Kat, and I personally took a lot away from what she had to say. So please check out Monsters at Work, now streaming on Disney Plus. And next week we will be reviewing Shang-Chi, which will be in theaters on Thursday, I believe. And it'll just be so exciting to see another Marvel film in theaters again. So I will catch you then.